I want you to do something for me. Right now, wherever you are, unless you're driving, in which case, please keep your hands on the wheel. I want you to just hold your arm out in front of you.
Just hold it there.
Yeah, just hold it there in empty space. Now, wiggle your fingers, rotate your wrist, bend your elbow.
It feels incredibly simple, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a thought, move my finger, and the finger just, well, it moves. It feels instantaneous. It feels direct.
Exactly. It feels like there's a direct line from your conscious mind straight to the muscle. But if you were a robotics engineer, if you were trying to build a machine to replicate what you just did,
Oh, forget it.
let alone what a major league pitcher does when they throw a 95-mile-an-hour slider, you would realize that the human arm is a mathematical nightmare.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got 7 main axes of rotation. You have dozens of muscles all interacting. You have nonlinear dynamics, millions of neurons firing all at once.
And yet somehow, you can pick up a coffee cup without crushing it, or you can paint the corner of the strike zone from 60 feet away with pinpoint accuracy.
And for the last 100 years, the scientific community has been basically fighting a civil war over how that is even possible.
Right. We all assume there's a little man inside our brain, a pilot pulling levers, contract bicep, relax tricep. But the research we are covering today suggests that the pilot theory isn't just slightly off, it might be completely wrong.
We are looking at a really seminal paper today by Mark Eluotash titled Evolution of Motor Control, From Reflexes and Motor Programs to the Equilibrium Point Hypothesis.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but it argues that your brain isn't a pilot flying a plane. It's much closer to a shepherd herding sheep.
So today we are dismantling the concept of muscle memory. We are going to start telling pitchers to repeat their delivery in that robotic sense.
We have to.
We are going to introduce a scientifically grounded model, the equilibrium point hypothesis, that explains how an ace actually moves. This is the source code of the fastball.
It's a dense paper, for sure. It covers physics, neurophysiology, control theory, even the history of philosophy. But if we can decode it, and that's the goal here, it provides a completely new framework for pitching.
And it challenges the idea that the brain programs force.
That's the core of it.
Which sounds insane to me because when I throw a ball, I feel like I am generating force. I feel the effort. I feel my muscles working.
You feel the output? Sure, of course you do. But the command, the actual signal from the brain, this research suggests the command is something else entirely.
What then?
The brain isn't telling the muscles to contract. It's treating the arm like a system of tunable springs. It sets thresholds. It sets what the paper calls reference configurations.
Okay, we are going to unpack all of that. But before we get to the physics of the fastball, we have to go back in time. Latash starts his history of motor control not in a lab, but in ancient Greece.
He does. And look, it's not just for academic flair. You really cannot understand modern sports science without understanding this ancient argument between Plato and Aristotle. Seriously. It sounds highbrow, but I promise you this is the exact same argument happening in pitching coaches' offices right now, today.
So set the stage for us. In the red corner, we have Plato.
Plato was the ultimate internalist. He looked at human movement, what he called self-motion, and he saw it as proof of the soul. To him, the source of all movement was entirely within the being.
So the environment, the ground, gravity, the wind, that was just background noise.
Just noise. The soul commands and the body obeys. End of story.
Okay, so if we translate that to 2026, this is the ancestor of the motor program, the idea that the brain has a script, a .exe file, I press play, and my arm executes the script regardless of what's happening outside.
Exactly, it's the command model. But then in the blue corner, you have Aristotle.
His student.
And Aristotle was an observer of nature. He argued that coordination comes from the interaction with the environment. You don't just move. You move against something. You move in a context.
So Aristotle is the grandfather of context.
He is the grandfather of what we now call dynamic systems theory. He's saying that movement isn't a monologue, it's a dialogue. It's a negotiation between your body and the physics of the world.
And this split, the commander versus the negotiator, that's the fault line.
It tears right through the 20th century.
Let's fast forward to that 20th century split then. On the reactive side, the Pavlovian side, we have this idea of reflexes.
Right. Ivan Pavlov. We all know him for the dog and the bell. He represented the idea that movement is just a chain of reflexes. You have inborn reflexes and you have conditioned reflexes.
And his theory was that if you repeat an action enough times, you are physically cutting a new pathway through the nervous system.
You're literally carving a path.
This is the 10,000 hours rule in its rawest, grittiest form. This is the old school pitching coach telling you to throw 1,000 bullpen sessions to groove your mechanics.
It's a powerful image.
The idea is that you are carving a literal groove in your brain like a needle on a vinyl record. If I just do it enough times, the program becomes permanent.
Precisely. And that is still the dominant view in most amateur coaching. Do it until you can't get it wrong.
But then you have Sir Charles Sherrington, the founder of modern neurophysiology. He took a more nuanced view of this.
He did. He didn't see reflexes as these hardwired robots. He saw them as tunable mechanisms.
Tunable, that's a key word. What does that mean in this context?
Well, think of a reflex not as a switch that is either on-in or OF, but as a system with a volume dial. Sherrington suggested the brain doesn't just trigger a reflex, it modulates the parameters of the reflex. It changes the sensitivity.
So it's not just knee-jerk, it's how much knee-jerk.
Exactly. And this is the crucial foreshadowing of the equilibrium point hypothesis. The brain is tuning the system, not just running a program.
But the real disruption comes with a guy named Nikolai Bernstein. Latosh spends a lot of time on Bernstein because he really blew up the whole Pavlovian groove idea.
Bernstein is a legend in this field. He was actually in the active camp, arguing for what he called engrams or motor programs. But, and this is a huge but, he realized that a rigid motor program is physically impossible.
Why impossible? I mean, if I can memorize a poem, why can't I memorize a muscle sequence?
Because of the environment. Bernstein was the first to really grasp this. He realized that you cannot encode exact torque patterns in the brain because the external conditions never repeat perfectly.
Let's apply this directly to the mound. A pitcher throws a fastball. The next pitch, maybe the dirt on the mound has shifted a quarter of an inch.
Maybe the wind picked up?
Maybe his rotator cuff is 1% more fatigued than it was 10 seconds ago.
Exactly. The context has changed. If your brain sent the exact same electrical signal to the muscles as the previous pitch, the exact same voltage, same timing, the ball would go somewhere completely different.
Why?
Because the resistance has changed. The groove doesn't work because the record player keeps moving.
That is a terrifying thought for a pitcher who relies on consistency. You're saying consistency of input leads to inconsistency of output.
Yes. If the world changes and you don't change with it, you fail. Bernstein's big insight was that the brain isn't coding for force. It has to be coding for something else, something that allows for flexibility.
And this leads us to the problem with motor programs in general. We tried to fix this with something called schema theory, right? The idea that we have a generalized motor program where we just tweak the speed or force.
Right, like you have a generic throw program and you just turn the volume up or down.
But Latosh points out a glaring issue with all these traditional motor programs: feedback.
Right. Traditional engineering, traditional robotics says if you have an error, you need feedback to correct it. You throw, your hand is a bit too wide, your eyes see it, your brain computes the error, and it sends a correction.
But a pitch takes, what, a fraction of a second?
The acceleration phase of a pitch, from the moment the arm starts forward to the release of the ball, is incredibly fast. We are talking roughly 30 to 50 milliseconds for the final internal rotation.
30 milliseconds. And how long does a visual signal take to get to the brain, get processed, and send a correction back out?
Visual processing to motor output is, on a good day, at least 150 to 200 milliseconds.
So do the math. By the time your brain even realizes, oh no, my arm is too low, the ball has already been in the catcher's mitt for 1/10 of a second.
Exactly. Pitching is too fast for conscious or even loop-based feedback correction during the throw itself. You cannot steer the pitch once the explosion starts. It's ballistic.
So we have a dilemma. We know the brain has a plan, that's the motor program part. But we also know the body has to deal with physics and gravity without waiting for the brain. That's the dynamic systems part.
And Latosh uses the pendulum example, which I think really crystallizes this.
Explain that.
It's the perfect illustration. Think of a simple grandfather clock pendulum swinging. Tick, tock. It has a rhythm, it has a cycle. But does it have a brain telling it to move every millisecond?
No. You push it once and it just goes.
It swings because of gravity and momentum. It swings because of the laws of physics. The intelligence of the movement is embedded in the mechanics of the system itself, not in some external computer controlling it.
So the goal, the holy grail of motor control, is to find a model that combines the program, the pitcher's intention, with the pendulum, the physics of the arm.
We need a shepherd that uses the landscape to guide the sheep, not a pilot who has to steer every single step.
And that brings us to section 3, the equilibrium point hypothesis.
This is the brainchild of a scientist named Anatol Feldman, and it starts with a really cool concept from physics, the relativity of motion. Latosh uses the elevator example.
I love this example because it's so visceral. So I'll set the scene. You are standing in an elevator. You feel gravity pulling you down. Your legs are active, fighting gravity to keep you upright.
You feel that force.
Suddenly, the cable snaps. And for a moment, as you're in free fall, you feel weightless.
Right. The force of gravity seems to disappear relative to you. Forces emerge or disappear depending on your reference frame. Feldman took this idea and applied it to muscles. He asked, how do muscles know how much force to produce?
And the prevailing theory, the one you mentioned earlier, was that the brain tells them, muscle, give me 50 newtons.
But the EP hypothesis says no.
No, the EP hypothesis says the brain sets a threshold. In the model, this is called lambda, the Greek letter lambda.
Okay, I'm going to push back here because I've lifted weights my whole life. When I curl a dumbbell, I feel like I'm sending a signal that says more power. I squeeze harder, the weight moves. You're telling me Latosh and Feldman say that's an illusion?
It is a very, very convincing illusion, but yes. The equilibrium point hypothesis claims your brain has no language for force. It doesn't know what a newton is. It operates on length and thresholds.
So decode lambda for me. What is the brain actually sending down the spinal cord?
Think of your house in the winter. You want the living room to be 72 degrees. Do you go to the furnace and type in burn gas for 4 minutes and 32 seconds at 80% intensity?
No. I'd either freeze or burn the house down. I just walk to the thermostat on the wall and set the dial to 72.
Right. You set a threshold. If the room is 70, the furnace kicks on. If the sun comes out and warms the room to 73, the furnace does nothing. You didn't command the fire, you commanded the state you wanted.
Okay, I'm following the thermostat. That makes sense. But how does that work in a bicep? A bicep isn't a heater.
It's a spring. The EP hypothesis treats every muscle like a tunable spring. The lambda signal from your brain is the command that sets the resting length of that spring.
So the brain tells the bicep, your new resting length is short.
Yes, your ideal length is now 10 inches, but your actual arm is straight, so the muscle is stretched to 14 inches long. The spring detects a gap. It says, hey, I'm stretched way past my setting. So what does a stretched spring do?
It pulls back. It generates force to try to shorten itself.
Exactly. The force is a reaction to the difference between the actual length and the threshold length, the lambda. The force isn't the command, it's the result.
Let's look at figure 1 from the source material to make this concrete for a pitcher. Scenario A is holding the ball. The pitcher is just standing there, ball and glove, relaxed.
So the brain sets a lambda, a threshold length. The muscle has a certain tone, but gravity is pulling the ball down. So the muscle stretches a little bit until the internal spring force perfectly matches the weight of the ball. That stable spot, that is the equilibrium point.
The brain didn't command, hold this weight. It just set the spring, and the physics found the balance.
Now, scenario B, active movement. The pitcher wants to lift his arm to throw.
Here's a magic. The brain does not shout contract. Instead, the brain just shifts the threshold. It changes the lambda value to a much shorter length. All of a sudden, the actual muscle is way longer than this new threshold.
The gap just got huge.
Huge. The spring thinks it is being stretched massively, so it generates a huge amount of force to try to reach that new equilibrium.
This flips my understanding of movement completely upside down. I always pictured the brain as the driver stepping on the gas pedal. But you're saying the brain is just moving the finish line and the car drives itself to get there.
That is a beautiful way to put it. The brain changes the reference point, and the muscle creates movement to minimize the error between where it is and where it's supposed to be.
Okay, but why is this better for pitching than the computer command model? Why go through this complex threshold business instead of just saying contract?
Because of what we talked about earlier. Context. Load compensation.
Yeah.
Let's say you are throwing a baseball, but it's a humid day and the ball feels a tiny bit heavier due to moisture. Or maybe the wind is pushing against your arm.
Okay, a variable is introduced.
If your brain programmed a specific force, 50 newtons, and the wind pushes back with 5 newtons, your arm stops short. You miss the spot. Your program failed because the math changed.
But with equilibrium point control?
With EP control, the brain sets a position threshold. I want the arm to be at this angle. If the wind pushes back, the muscle doesn't reach the threshold, it stays stretched. The spring property automatically generates more force to fight the wind, simply because it hasn't reached the target yet.
It handles the variables for you. You don't have to micromanage the turbulence.
Exactly. It makes the system robust. It explains why an ace can throw a strike even when he slips slightly on the mound. The thresholds are set to the target. The muscles simply work harder if the slip creates more resistance. The brain doesn't need to know why it's harder. The spring just responds to the stretch.
That is incredibly elegant. It's like the difference between hard coding a website and making it responsive.
It's exactly like that. The system adapts on its own.
Okay, let's move to section 4. We need to talk about what this looks like in the full delivery. We've talked about a single muscle, but a pitcher is using his whole body. The text talks about reference configurations.
This is where we move from the micro to the macro. The brain isn't just setting a threshold for the bicep. It is setting a reference body configuration in external space.
So if I'm a pitcher, I shouldn't be thinking rotate hip, then extend tricep, then pronate wrist.
No. God, no. That is way too slow and too complex. The source suggests the brain visualizes a final pose, a configuration where the hand is at the release point. The brain shifts the lambda values for all the relevant muscles to make that position the new equilibrium. Essentially, the body falls into that pose.
There's a concept here that really stood out to me, and I think it's the key to velocity, the virtual trajectory.
This is critical. In the EP model, there are two trajectories. There is the actual trajectory where your meat and bone arm actually is, and there is the virtual trajectory, the path of the equilibrium points commanded by the brain.
And they aren't in the same place at the same time?
In a slow movement, like reaching for a cup of coffee, they are basically synced up. The virtual arm is just a millimeter ahead, guiding the real arm, but pitching is not reaching for coffee.
Pitching is violent.
Exactly. In a fast, violent movement, the virtual trajectory leads the way. The brain shifts the threshold fast. It might set the equilibrium point at the catcher's mitt before the hand is even past the pitcher's head.
Whoa. So the brain is living in the future.
Yes. The brain moves the virtual arm to the release point almost instantly. But the real arm has mass. It has inertia. It's heavy, so it lags behind.
So the brain is standing at the finish line, checking its watch, while the physical arm is still way back behind the head.
Precisely. And that gap, that massive distance between where the brain says the arm should be and where the arm actually is, that is what creates the torque.
Going back to the spring analogy, if the anchor point moves way, way ahead, the spring gets stretched to its absolute limit.
And what does a stretched spring do? It snaps back. Hard. That is the whip effect. The torque isn't created by consciously grinding the muscles. It's created by the gap between the virtual trajectory and the real trajectory. The bigger the gap, the stronger the snap.
This explains why the best pitchers often look like they are moving effortlessly, yet the ball just explodes out of their hand.
You're not muscling it.
They aren't muscling it in the gym sense. They are creating a massive gap between where their brain says the arm should be and where the arm physically is.
And this leads to a huge misunderstanding in coaching. Coaches talk about lag. They want the arm to lag behind the body. But often they teach it by telling pitchers to actively hold the arm back. Leave your arm behind.
Right. Keep your hands back. I hear that all the time.
The EP hypothesis says the lag is a byproduct of the neural command moving ahead. You don't create lag by slowing down the arm. You create lag by moving the neural target forward faster than the limb can keep up.
You are tricking your own reflexes.
You are tricking your own reflexes into thinking they are wildly out of position, so they snap back with maximum violence to catch up.
That is a profound distinction. One feels like tension and holding. The other feels like a rubber band snapping.
Exactly. One is active holding, the other is dynamic snapping.
Let's look at the dashboard of control. We've talked about the threshold lambda, but the text explains that when we deal with joints, like the elbow or shoulder, we have two distinct control knobs. We have the reciprocal command, or prilers, and the coactivation command, 3-dol.
This is where we get into the mechanics of the joint. So think of the elbow. It has two main muscle groups. Flexors, like the bicep, and extensors, like the tricep. They work in opposition.
They're agonist and antagonist.
Correct. The reciprocal command is when the brain shifts the thresholds of both muscles in the same direction. So it lowers the threshold for the tricep, telling it to shorten, and it raises it for the bicep, telling it to lengthen.
So one relaxes, the other engages. They agree on where the joint should go.
Right. This moves the joint. This creates motion. In pitching, the tri command is the gas. It moves the arm from the cocked position to the release point. It generates the torque we just talked about.
And the other knob, the coactivation command, or attack.
This is when the brain shifts the thresholds in opposite directions. It lowers the threshold for the bicep, and it lowers the threshold for the tricep.
So both muscles want to shorten at the same time. They are fighting each other.
Exactly. They pull against each other. This doesn't create motion because the forces cancel out. The joint stays in the same angle. But it becomes stiff. It becomes rigid.
In pitching, the leader's command is the brakes, or maybe more accurately, the roll cage. It stabilizes the joint.
It is the ultimate trade-off. Think about the forces on an elbow during a pitch. The centrifugal force is trying to rip the forearm away from the upper arm to protect the ulnar collateral ligament, the UCL.
Tommy John ligament.
The Tommy John ligament. To protect that, you need a high subject command. You need stiffness to keep the bones aligned.
But if I'm stiff, I can't move fast. That seems like a problem.
That's the problem. High stiffness means the muscles are fighting each other. That increases metabolic costs. You get tired faster. And crucially, it fights against the movement itself. If you are too stiff, you can't create that whip. You are driving with the parking brake on.
So the ace is the pitcher who finds the perfect ratio. Enough to command to not blow out their elbow, but enough to command to throw 98 miles an hour.
And this addresses the controversy mentioned in the text. Critics like Gomi and Kawato argued that, well, human joints aren't naturally stiff enough to validate the EP hypothesis. But Latosh defends it by saying, you don't need infinite stiffness if your reference trajectory is accurate.
What does that mean, if the reference trajectory is accurate?
It means if your technique is clean, if your virtual trajectory is smooth and efficient, you don't need to armor plate your elbow with a ton of muscle tension. You can afford to be looser. You can rely on the natural physics of the movement rather than brute force stability.
Relaxed velocity. We hear that term all the time. Scouts love it. He has easy gas. This gives it a physical definition. Low coactivation, high reciprocal drive.
Precisely. The amateur tries to protect his arm by stiffening up. That's the SIC command, which kills his velocity. The pro trusts his trajectory and relaxes the stiffness, which is the dollar command, allowing the spring to snap.
Let's move to section 6. We have to talk about synergies. This is where the paper gets really interesting about how the brain manages all this complexity. Because we aren't just moving an elbow, we are moving hips, spine, shoulder, elbow, wrist, fingers, all of it.
The human arm has dozens of muscles. To move the shoulder, elbow, and wrist to a specific point in space, there are mathematically infinitely many combinations of muscle forces that could get the job done.
And traditional theory calls this the redundancy problem.
Yes, it views it as a bug. Oh no, the brain has too many choices. How does it pick one? It's seen as a computational burden.
But Latosh and Gelfand flip this. They call it the principle of abundance.
It's not a bug, it's a feature. The brain doesn't try to pick one perfect solution. It creates a synergy. A synergy is a family of solutions.
Okay, an analogy.
Think of it like driving on a highway.
Yeah.
You want to stay in your lane. That is the goal. But within the lane, you can drift a little left, a little right. You can make small corrections. You have an abundance of positions that are all valid. They all get you down the road.
This connects to the uncontrolled manifold hypothesis, or UCM. That sounds like sci-fi, but break it down for us.
It's a way of measuring variability. The UCM hypothesis divides all the variables of a movement into two buckets. Bucket 1 is the controlled manifold. These are the variables that matter. For a pitcher, this is the release point coordinates and the velocity of the ball. The brain cares about these deeply. It corrects any error here immediately.
And bucket 2?
Bucket 2 is the uncontrolled manifold. These are variables the brain allows to fluctuate. For example, the exact angle of your elbow during the windup, or the specific rotation of the shoulder mid-delivery.
Wait, so the brain allows error. I thought the whole goal of practice was to be a machine, to be identical every single time.
That is the old way of thinking. The brain allows variability if it doesn't affect the result. This is what we call good variability. If you look at high-speed camera footage of aces, their release point is remarkably consistent, almost identical every time. But if you look at their elbows and shoulders during the delivery, there is actually quite a bit of variation from pitch to pitch.
Because the body is self-organizing to solve the problem.
Yes. Maybe on pitch 50, the hip is a little tired. It doesn't fire quite as hard. The synergy automatically adjusts the shoulder rotation to compensate, so the hand still ends up in the perfect spot.
The end result is the same.
The brain doesn't freeze the mechanics. It allows the components to fluctuate to preserve the outcome.
This is why teaching a pitcher to be robotic and repeat your delivery perfectly can actually be dangerous.
It is so dangerous. If you try to eliminate all variability, you try to freeze the uncontrolled manifold, you are fighting the principle of abundance. You are forcing the body to solve the problem the exact same way every time, even when fatigue sets in. That creates repetitive stress concentration on one spot.
So if I'm fighting to keep my elbow at exactly 92 degrees because a coach told me to, but my body wants to go to 94 degrees to compensate for a tired leg?
You are breaking the synergy. You are adding tension where there shouldn't be any. Latasha argues that allowing the internal joints to fluctuate protects the system. It distributes the load across different tissues from pitch to pitch.
So the ACE mindset isn't robot, it's jazz musician. The note at the end is the same, but how you get there can flow a little bit.
That's a great analogy. The hierarchy control, which is figure 3 in the paper, shows this perfectly.
Break down that hierarchy.
At the top, level 1, the task. Throw a strike. That's the intent. Level 2 is the reference configuration for the hand. Where in space does the hand need to be? Level 3 is the joint commands, the $3 and all dollars. And at the very bottom, level 4 is the individual muscle thresholds, the lambdas.
So the brain focuses on the top of the hierarchy.
Yes, level 1 and 2, it lets the lower levels sort themselves out. A bad pitcher, or a badly coached pitcher, focuses on level 4, contract my tricep. That just breaks the whole synergy.
Paralysis by analysis. You're jamming the system by trying to manually override the abundance.
Exactly.
Now, we have to play devil's advocate here. We are presenting this theory as, this amazing new framework, but Section 7 covers the criticisms. The EP hypothesis hasn't gone unchallenged.
No, of course not. That's how science works.
And the most famous one involves a monkey.
The deferented monkey argument. This is classic science. Emilio Bizzi and his team wanted to test if reflexes were truly necessary for movement. So they performed a surgery where they cut the dorsal roots of the spinal cord in monkeys.
What does that do? What's a dorsal root?
It cuts the sensory input. The monkeys could send commands out to the muscles, but they couldn't feel anything coming back. No stretch reflex, no proprioception. They were flying blind.
And the critics said, if the EP hypothesis relies on the stretch reflex, that spring mechanism, then cutting the nerves should break the movement completely.
Right. If you cut the wire to the thermostat, the furnace shouldn't work. But here's the kicker. The monkeys could still move. They could still point to a target. It was clumsier, for sure, but they could do it.
So doesn't that kill the theory? If I can move without the spring mechanism, then the spring mechanism isn't the whole story.
Not necessarily. Latasha argues that the brain is adaptable. It's not a one-trick pony. When you cut the reflexes, the brain switches strategies. It goes from the lambda model, which is threshold control, to what he calls the alpha model.
And what's that?
It starts driving the alpha motor neurons directly.
It bypasses the thermostat and hotwires the furnace.
Exactly. But here is the key defense. The EP principle still holds because muscles are viscoelastic. They are gooey and springy by nature. Even without reflexes, if you stimulate them, they will settle at an equilibrium point. The mechanism changes, but the physics remains.
So the limb still moves to a balance point. It just takes a different neural route to get there.
Precisely. The brain found a workaround.
Then there is the N-shaped trajectory problem. This sounds like a measurement issue more than a theory issue.
It is. Critics say, okay, this is a great theory, but we can't find these lambda signals. And Latasha admits it. We don't have a lambda meter. We can't stick a probe in the spine and see the threshold setting. We can only infer it from the movement.
It's like trying to reverse engineer the software of a computer just by watching what's on the screen.
It's exactly that. You can make a really good guess, but you can't see the code directly. Not yet.
But despite the criticism, the concept of equifinality seems to hold up. And this is the part that feels most relevant to sports.
Equifinality is the idea that if you bump the arm mid-movement, it still ends up at the target.
Right.
In pitching, if a batter tips the ball in your glove, or you scuff your foot on the mound, or your sleeve catches on your hip, does the hand still find the release point? The EP hypothesis explains this best. The threshold, the lambda, didn't change, so the system automatically fights to get back to the plan.
The destination was programmed, not the route.
Exactly.
Okay, we are in the home stretch. Section 8. We need to boil this all down for the listener who is actually standing on the mound or coaching someone who is. How do we apply the physics of the ACE? We've got the theory, give me the practice.
It starts with redefining a word we hear every day in sports. Relaxation.
Right.
There's a classic study by Wacholder and Altenberger from way back in 1927. They showed that you can be relaxed at different positions, not just one state.
For a pitcher, relaxing isn't going limp. If you go limp, gravity takes over and your arm just falls off.
Right. In this framework, relaxation means matching your internal threshold to your current physical position.
Can you give me a practical visualization for that? I'm on the mound. I'm at the top of my leg lift, that balance point.
Okay, you are at the top of your leg lift. You want to be balanced.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be fighting your own muscles to stay there. You want the springs set exactly to hold that position with minimal effort.
And if I'm tense?
If you are tense, it means your thresholds are set wrong. Your brain is telling your muscles be shorter, but your body is forcing them to be longer. You are fighting yourself. That is wasted energy. The ace sets the threshold to the posture. They are relaxed in the shape.
This connects to the minimal end state action principle?
The system naturally seeks the lowest energy state. If you are fighting your mechanics, you are fighting physics. The ace lets the body fall from one equilibrium to the next.
So let's summarize the new framework. Point 1, don't program force.
Right. Stop thinking about pushing the ball. Program the reference configuration. Visualize the final pose, the release point, the extension out over your front foot. Trust the brain to map the path to get there. Focus on the where, not the how hard.
Point 2, trust the springs.
Use the load. When your arm lays back in external rotation, that scary position where the ball is almost behind your head, don't try to muscle it forward immediately. Let the weight of the ball stretch the spring. Let the virtual trajectory get way ahead of the arm. Then just let the snap happen naturally. Ride the bounce.
Point 3, train the synergy.
Yes. Stop trying to be a robot. Allow for good variability. If your elbow angle changes slightly from pitch to pitch, but the ball goes to the mitt, don't try to correct it. That is your body protecting itself through abundance. Don't coach the style out of a pitcher if the outcome is consistent.
And finally, point 4, manage gas and brakes.
Be aware of stiffness. If you feel grindy, if you feel slow, you probably have too much coactivation. You're driving with the parking brake on. You need to mentally lower the stiffness to let the reciprocal command, the gas, do its work.
This has been a massive shift in perspective. We started with Plato and the soul, and we ended with tunable springs and virtual trajectories.
It connects all the dots. We aren't machines made of gears and levers. We are biological systems that have to interact with the laws of physics.
So what is the so what here? Why does this matter?
It matters because the ace isn't a robot repeating a script. The ace is a master of setting thresholds. They are a master of allowing their body's natural physics to solve the unbelievably complex equation of throwing a baseball.
And the text makes a pretty bold claim at the end. It says that physics leaves no room for alternatives to the EP principle.
It's a strong statement. But if the EP hypothesis is correct, and the evidence is very strong, then every coach teaching muscle contraction is literally fighting the laws of physics. They're teaching a language the body doesn't speak.
And here is a final thought to keep you up at night. Latosh mentioned we need a lambda meter. We can't see these signals yet.
Not yet.
But technology is moving so fast. We have Hawkeye tracking the ball. We have biomechanics labs tracking the bones. What happens when we can measure lambda? What happens when we can see the invisible virtual trajectory of a Cy Young winner?
That will be the day we stop guessing. We will be able to see the ghost arm that leads the real arm. We'll be able to see the pitcher's intent, not just the result. And that might change sports forever.
Until then, trust your springs, find your equilibrium, and let it fly.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.